Hi, everyone. It is my great pleasure to share my thoughts about the exhibition Guo Pei, Couture Fantasy, now on view at the Legion of Honor with you all today. The topic of my discussion is the role and significance of ornament and animation in Guo Pei's designs through an examination of porcelain and objects on display at the museum. Walking around the exhibition at the Legion of Honor, visitors will encounter galleries in which human figures dressed in opulent ensembles by Guo Pei, the designer, magnify the decorative and ornamental characteristics of early modern European artworks. A particular synergy is felt as one walks through the galleries, witnessing the ways in which that which is peripheral becomes central through Guo Pei's work. At times, we are able to see that it is the framing of decorative objects that become the central subject comprising Guo Pei's design. And her work transforms ornamental objects into entire couture dresses. So here are two installation views that I took that showed two ensembles from two separate collections. And I think on the right side is a photograph of the reflection in the mirror of 18th century French interior decoration and design, where Guo Pei's dress is on view, or is at least visible through the reflection. And the two porcelain vases on the right have been reformatted through rather laborious processes to become not vases, but potpourri pots. And they are underglazed blue porcelain with red enamel decoration over the layer of glaze. And they were likely made, I think, in 1700s Japan. And this slide, I think, is an installation view of how Guo Pei's work transforms ornamental objects into an entire dress. And you can kind of see partially on top of the French cabinet, richly decorated, a set of garniture of 5 vases. Those are also blue and white, likely made in Japan during a period when porcelain from China was losing somewhat of a market share, and when they discovered porcelain in Japan. And so I just wanted to show some of these installation views if you haven't seen it yet. In modern design, visual form is subservient to function, somewhat encapsulated by the oft-cited work attributed to Austrian architect Adolf Loos when he wrote in 1908 essay entitled Ornament and Crime. In that essay, he decried the use of ornament in design structures and sort of shepherded modernist principles of construction and design into the mainstream. While Guo Pei's dresses are indeed ornamental, it would be a mistake to merely see them as instances of a peripheral and superfluousness, or the antithesis of good design. But to limit Guo Pei's work's significance to just lavishness or mere elaborate craftsmanship is to miss the ways in which they reveal and comment upon complex art historical themes that have been global in scope since at least as early as the 17th century, and provided by this exhibition for us to ponder. The theme of global interaction and cross-border interplay in history features most saliently in the gallery in which 3 blue and white dresses are on display at the museum. Standing tall and majestically on the right side upon first entering the gallery, all 3 gowns feature designs that refer generally to the visual form of porcelain. And this visual form is composed of 2 colors, and it was the type that was most sought after by European aristocrats, rulers, and princes during the 1600s and 1700s. And I think many people have heard of the story of Augustus the Strong, the Elector of Saxony, who was so obsessed with the production of white gold, which is what they referred to as porcelain, that he kept captive a sort of trickster by the name of Johannes Bettger to insist that he turn, after his claim that he could turn base metal into gold, that he find a way to reinvent porcelain using sort of Saxony local resources. This photo shows two images, and I think it demonstrates a sort of appropriate example of the aristocratic and princely desire for porcelain in Europe. It shows the conspicuous consumption and spectacle at work in accumulating porcelain objects when the self-declared Prussian King Frederick III built a porcelain room, which I think the sort of spectacular conspicuousness of its sort of accumulative power is most magnified when you consider the sort of placement of mirrors and reflectivity in position with places where light may intrude into the room. This was a room built in honor of his wife, Queen Sophie Charlotte, and it is located in present-day Berlin and began construction in the early 18th century. Despite blue and white porcelain's recognizability as something called Chinaware, porcelain's history is not as Sinocentric as one might think. Scholars have articulated repeatedly through ongoing archaeological discoveries that blue and white was perhaps international in origin. And these are discoveries that have continuously revised the timeline and sort of cultural geography of porcelain over the last 50 years or so. In fact, now a little bit more, I think. Here it may be useful to provide a few details about the history and technical material of porcelain. While colloquially, we frequently refer to blue and white porcelain as Chinaware, the world center of porcelain production for the last 800 or so years is a small market town entitled Jingdezhen, which is denoted by this red arrow. I'm going to use my cursor here, located west of Shanghai. And today it takes 2 hours a plane ride to fly there from Shanghai. By the 1300s, this little market town denoted by the red arrow, Jingdezhen, ceramicists who practiced in Jingdezhen already understood that cobalt oxide, which is a raw resource stemming from cobalt ores mined potentially in present-day Iran and other Persianate lands, was particularly stable during the firing process. In other words, if you make ceramics, it has to undergo at least some type of firing process. And if you want to paint or produce and apply designs onto the unfired object, sometimes those designs will run or evaporate in the kiln, but not so for cobalt. And ceramicists in Jingdezhen by 1300s understood this nexus between cobalt and porcelain as part of its manufacture. And this is one of the reasons for which blue and white porcelain from Jingdezhen became so popular worldwide from that period. It also speaks to the fact that porcelain from Jingdezhen was durable and capable of holding ornamental painted design, making it a apt material for holding symbolic materials, iconographic significance, and imperial communication, as well as symbols of status and aristocracy. So again, technically, having only been fired once, porcelain from Jingdezhen and the blue design are fused together through the firing process, which was only subjected through a once firing process, speaking to the efficiency of its manufacturing and making process that saved time because cobalt and the porcelain's unfired ceramic would fuse at similar temperatures, upward of about 1250 degrees to 1350 degrees Celsius. So as you can see on these two early 1300s porcelains from Jingdezhen, the blue patterns and ornament and design continue to this day, despite being almost 900 years old. I'm sorry, 800 years old, continue to, I think, broadcast clear pattern and image making, and it seemingly seems to have no interruption in the sort of smoothness of its texture and surface in its glaze. And this is another 1300s early blue and white porcelain from Jingdezhen. And again, I think if you were to touch it, you would notice that very few impurities or interruptions in the surface would appear, making it an extremely smooth type of object to touch and collect and use, even for holding probably food. This slide is meant to show us or present a comparison that makes the contrast in durability between Jingdezhen porcelain and its sort of knockoffs over the last 600 years clear. On the left, you have the LACMA charger, which is a very large object, actually, one of the earlier 1300s porcelains made in Jingdezhen that were decorated with this blue and white chromatic program. And on the right, you see another blue and white chromatic design. But I think if you look closely, you'll see that the small dish on the right, made in Delft, Netherlands in the 1680s, is actually an earthenware that was first covered with tin oxide glaze, the tin being the ingredient that enabled a sort of opacified white glaze that would hide the darker ceramic earthenware underneath. And you can see that if I can pull up my cursor here on the left where it's been shipped. And so again, I think this demonstrates appropriately how Jingdezhen porcelain's one process of making that needed only one time of firing to make and complete an object produced a sort of more durable and less easily chipped sort of ceramic, and also a blue and white object that would continue to remain vivid and vibrant in its design and painted patterns. The very first blue and white porcelains from Jingdezhen were in fact not made for domestic consumers alone, or even emperors in Beijing of the 1300s Yuan Mongol dynasty court, or even the early 1400s or mid 1400s Ming dynasty court. Rather, collections of blue and white porcelain worldwide from the 1300s suggest that Jingdezhen porcelain, made in the earliest years of discovery of this cobalt stability, catered to clients in West Asia or the Middle East and later the Ottoman court. Many have noted their oversized, nearly 20-inch width in diameter, and how that size is a disjunct with 14th century dining habits in Yuan and early Ming dynasty China. And so the largest collections of this early blue and white with larger relatively sized objects are in fact located in, say, the Topkapi Museum or palaces in present-day Turkey, and also here in the National Museum in Tehran in Iran, or present-day Iran. Thus, many of the porcelain objects in which patterns of blue color contrast vividly with the white from this earliest 1300s period of global diffusion show symbols and icons taken from West Asian and Islamic design principles. As shown on two early Jingdezhen blue and whites, I've shown these before, and they're also on a post online at the Fine Arts Museum, the San Francisco's website. The layout of the design on these two chargers are densely arrayed, suggesting or showing a sort of fear of empty space, which is a common principle on other designed objects from Persian lands, including carpets, metalwork, and textiles from this time period. In these two early 1300s made in Jingdezhen porcelain objects, the blue, in fact, is as much a part of the white in the overall composition of the object. So you have floral scrolls that encircle the object on the left on the outermost panel. And you also have symmetrically arrayed layouts and botanical motifs that populate the entire expanse and surface of the Jingdezhen porcelain object. And both of these, I think, show a similar sort of interest in using that cobalt to great success, but also an equal sort of focus of the design. For a comparison, I want you to note that these shared characteristics with sort of West Asian ceramics can be seen in something like this ceramic, which is not actually made out of porcelain, of course, because it was made in what is present-day Iran, dates to the Ilkhanid period, roughly 13th and 14th centuries. And it's a sort of dish which exhibits the same sort of geometric ornament, repeating pattern and radial design, with blue contrasting the most with the white. And much of the pattern is densely arrayed onto the object. Uh-oh. So we can now take a look at how Guo Pei's dress from 2010 demonstrates the design on her that surpasses a general description of a static Chineseness in porcelain. As is clear, her dress borrows floral and iconic patterns from early Jingdezhen blue and white, from the scrolls of vines that you see kind of applied and stitched into various regions in this sort of central portion of the round train, to the cresting waves. So on the left, the large porcelain charger on the top left from LACMA exhibits these really dynamic waves that are outlined when they crest around the outermost rim here, where it's kind of foliate shaped. And you can see those waves similarly embroidered, of course, in fact, highlighted, I think, with the crystals on one of the border panels that kind of encircle that circle-shaped train that extends from the dress. But the most prominent impact of this dress is the way in which the structure and the concepts of design disrupt the idea that blue and white porcelain are simply Chinese or China ware, and in fact evokes the international history of the medium's history and origin. The train of the dress is embroidered with blue silk on background. So I'm referring here where this lotus design with extending vines and leaves are in fact white and then outlined in stitched thread and applied to a, I think, embroidered background on the dress. And this kind of reversal that from the assumed blue on white background of porcelain from Jingdezhen is maybe somewhat of a striking contrast with the type of porcelain that was the most popular in Europe in the following centuries. So I'll just show some examples here. On the left, this is a sort of a accumulation or a gathering of porcelain that have been found in collections in Europe in the 16th and 17th century. And you can kind of see how most of the pattern and ornament and painted work with cobalt is generally blue and against a white background. And so I think it's kind of an interesting move to see Guo Pei's dress put forth this blue on sort of this blue background or white on blue background to kind of refer to the suggested origins of blue and white porcelain in global art history. The dress here specifically draws from the abundance of blue that results from the rich and liberal use of blue cobalt, which again, I might say, is purportedly, or what we think at those early 1300 years, mined from ores that were in West Asia. and then made for clients in West Asian countries and lands. By specifically integrating this reverse bichromal palette, Guo Pei's porcelain dress emphasizes not Chineseness, nor European definitions and preferences for porcelain, but the more dynamic, cross-border, and peripatetic nature of how blue and white first developed. She relies not on origin, but on origin stories. Another dress on display in the same room and same platform further highlights Guo Pei's dresses as contributing to a discussion about global art history and the role of fantasy and storytelling of geopolitics therein. The dress features a high waist, loose flowing drapes of diaphanous fabric, and a spare landscape in blue under the outer sheer layer. Until the 17th century, landscapes as motifs or decorating a large portion of a porcelain object from Jingdezhen was less common for consumers in Imperial Ming Dynasty and Qing Dynasty China. Jingdezhen ceramicists did not frequently use landscapes as a design schema, favoring court-driven patterns of repeating imperial symbols such as dragons and lotus, stylized auspicious mushrooms, for instance. So here on this slide, I wanted to show you this new development when landscape motifs and compositions became more popular on Jingdezhen porcelain. And they flank Guo Pei's design here, where the flowing dress kind of hide and twist around and kind of warp the landscape blue and white object. Scholars have identified this era of proliferation for landscape designs on porcelain from Jingdezhen to the period between the fall, sort of disruptive and kind of chaotic period for Jingdezhen, actually, as it was the period of the fall of the Ming Dynasty, giving way to a new dynasty, which was established by sort of a conquering regime from the northeast, northwestern steppes called the Qing Dynasty. And this was a period in this Ming Dynasty to Qing Dynasty transition when potters and kilns at Jingdezhen found freedom to expand their clientele beyond the court or emperors and officials serving the court at the center of imperial power, as they were kind of busy working around war and rebellion. So these are two examples I'm just showing you, and it's actually a very neat innovation, I think. Some of these were domestically purchased in the area around present-day Shanghai, and others headed towards Japan and Southeast Asia, and eventually to Europe in the 1700s. European porcelain manufacturers favored the landscape style, often miniaturizing them into diminutive tokens. And I'll just show you an example. So for instance, in Delft, in the Netherlands in the 1680s, this small dish, it's in the collection, I think, of the Legion of Honor, which was in fact made out of earthenware, as they did not have the requisite materials or formula for making porcelain in the 1680s. Is kind of, is clearly composed of a landscape or figures and landscape design, both in the center round roll on this left, and also in the encircling panel that surrounds the round shape of this dish. And on the right is a vitrine or display case on view in the exhibition right now at the Legion of Honor. And I thought it was a wonderful juxtaposition. On the very right is this hexagonal small dish made in Worcester, where there was an English porcelain manufactory. And it dates to the mid-1700s. And here I saw these small little fan-shaped or circle-shaped open sort of white blanks or white areas in which landscape scenes seem to populate the porcelain. And so again, I think European porcelain designers favored this landscape style, but they often miniaturized them into diminutive scope. Their placement and scale suggest European objectification of the picturesque, filtered through what they thought was so-called Chinese design in England during the mid-18th century. And this large bowl actually was, according to the Legion of Honor, and it is also a landscape scene that occupies the outer surface, and it's actually really wonderful. And this, in fact, was made in Jingdezhen, but probably exported, whether purposefully or not. And I think it was a sort of non-imperial object. By contrast, Guo Pei's dress, while drawing upon landscape themes in blue and white porcelain and their English simulations, introduces the idea of palimpsest, layers, and kinetic movement to intervene in the process of European objectification. Textured layers, silken embroidered threads. I think the landscape on this dress is in fact produced through embroidery. And these material folds of the sheer fabric overlay convey kinetic movement of an idyllic landscape scene underneath. The translucency achieved through the adoption of a sheer overlay deepens the dress's mystery and evanescence and flow. And perhaps it sort of introduces the idea of escape and dynamism. Perhaps the translucent fabric points to a characteristic that added to the desirability of white porcelain in Europe, which was its delicateness and seemingly contradictory durability. When Europeans held porcelain from Jingdezhen under a light source, and you can try this as well, and many of you know this, if the vessel's walls are thin enough, the material of porcelain enables the filtration of light. Still, in this slide and in the galleries on view in this exhibition, you can see that Guo Pei's dress likely can respond more to the ability of ornament to animate blue and white objects and defy sort of fixed definition. Its haze introduced through this diaphanous fabric also enhances the porcelain's landscape's dreamlike ambiguity. Recently, scholars such as Anne Cheng have noted that ornament was often the language of aesthetics that produced racialized concepts of Asian women. Yet here, in contemporary designer Guo Pei's repertoire, ornament also has the capacity to liberate and to move and to help objects escape these essentializing definitions. Taken together, Guo Pei's blue and white porcelain dresses marshal the language of ornament to reanimate objects of global desire and free porcelain from its overgeneralized stereotypes and objectified histories of exchange and simulation. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Yes, I do, Jill. Thank you for this wonderful question. And I did not properly label all of the slides, but I do think that the porcelain dresses all hail from the 2010 collection, and I had to double check this, everything in the wonderful catalog published in conjunction with the exhibition. And I never thought about it until I saw the Guo Pei exhibition really, in conversation with the permanent collection at the Legion of Honor. But, the actual title of Arabian Nights is, or one of the titles of Arabian Nights is 1001 Nights. And she entitles this blue and white series with, the collection that includes the series of blue and white ensembles with 1002. And, other than the fact that many of those tales were interpreted in the 19th century by Europeans as sort of Oriental tales, and at schools in which Oriental studies were popular. It was a nice turn to see Guo Pei's decision to add another excessive, a superfluous number to 1001 to 1002, as if though she was playing with math and numerology, and the symbolism of numbers is an important language of humor and also in the Chinese language. So I thought it's fun to see how she is furthering fantasy, not in service of trying to play into objectification of women, but maybe to highlight the artistry and artfulness rather than just the rationality of being able to recreate porcelain. It was some of the slides that I shared, I hope, I think are types of ceramic that look blue and white. And in fact, they adopt that same design palette, chromatic palette of blue and white, but are clearly made they're sort of aping porcelain from Jingdezhen in their sort of earthenware substrate or in their tin oxide glaze. And so I thought that was kind of clever on the part of the designer and well exhibited in the permanent galleries at the museum right now. Okay, I'm reading one more question, another one. Let me go back to that slide, maybe. Oh, here's one. I'm sorry. So this is my own photo, and I clearly cut off the portion of the headpiece. And on a short essay I submitted to the museum for their online work, and I wrote a little bit about this headpiece and how it is another form of obfuscation, a sort of design strategy that I see that is being announced or visible in this 2010 blue and white porcelain dress from that collection, 1002 Nights. And so on this particular dress on the left, it's shown on the left here, you can see that there's actually a headpiece in which there is some sort of it's called a bulbous vase shape, or a sort of tianqiuping in Chinese. By the 19th century, there were these sort of branded terms for shapes and forms of vases as Jingdezhen continued to produce porcelain for both domestic imperial court and export consumption. And here, like one of the Stacey Pearson, a scholar and professor in London, has written a book about From Object to Concept, in which the Ming vase became sort of a sort of concept that has then been adapted into contemporary art, fine arts, ways of talking about global appropriations and instances of exchange. I thought this design was fascinating because it exhibits a crackle design that you can see in fact, in garden design manuals from the 1600s of the Ming Dynasty, in and around regions of present-day Suzhou, which is a pretty famous area for actual gardens that many visit and have become visitor tourist sites. And many gardens have walkways or pebbled paths arranged into this crackled manner. Some look at it and see it as a sort of like putting together broken pieces through the use of even more valuable materials such as gold, which is referred to as kintsugi in Japanese. And they did use that type of repair process, but I wanted to say that this crackling design on the headpiece here that obfuscates the vase in some ways, which, kind of I think is, again, like creating an obscure sort of Ming vase, or in fact, the shape can be found in the early 1400s. So it's not just Ming, but, and again, we're always revising the timeline. And I think Guo Pei plays into this dynamic timeline that's continually revised to try to escape this fixedness of China and porcelain. But I think we can look at this crackly type of crackle effect even on glazes. So in addition to garden, pavement, walkways and window ways and window sort of openings and door designs in 1600s and 1500s Ming garden design, you also see the crackling in in glazes, and it's literally called like crackle effect or ice crackle. And I think it's online in the article that I wrote, but if I have it here, maybe I can't, let me see. No, I can't find it really. If you look really closely, many ceramics exhibit that sort of crackle effect in their glaze even. And so I thought it was kind of a neat way to introduce this idea of layer and palimpsests, or like what remains is really just remnants and fragments. And sometimes that can be whole enough. And in fact, it really does make it a spectacular ensemble as this mannequin wears. Okay. The next question, I'm supposed to be reading it. Oh, okay. There's a question about this panel on the sort of diaphanous flowing dress comprising the landscape design. At least that's the last question I'm looking at right now. And I too thought it was neat that this higher waist section has been accentuated by this sort of pleat-like horizontal text fabric. And I assume it's silk by its sort of iridescence and sort of delicate nature. And it reminded me a lot about sort of the place of women in a lot of her designs, you know, and sort of her role as a CEO and owner, and also artist and designer in her work. She, in fact, herself knows how to stitch and was trained in such a way. So, and I like to see this sort of flowing, dynamic, figural form of an object, which is a landscape painted blue and white vase, as we've seen in today's slides, as a further sort of intervention of you know, as I mentioned, ornament has often been seen, particularly in the Rococo period, as sort of more feminine. And here it kind of further and highlights sort of the region where the waist is a bit higher, and as a sort of like maybe an echo of the vase shape. Many vases, I think, have a neck region and then they billow out, which is called the waist region. And in these dresses, the object turns into something wearable. And if you can imagine it on, say, a stage or on a walk in the show in Paris or in Beijing, you could see women in motion and moving and in animation. Thank you for your questions, and I enjoyed presenting these to you today, and I hope to be able to return to the show and that you will see the show many times.